The title of this book is The Spirit of Jesus Christ. The author of the book is Andrew Murray. We are in chapter 3, part B. Chapter 3, part B. The title of chapter 3 is Worship in Spirit. Worship in Spirit. To worship is man's highest glory. He was created for fellowship with God. Of that fellowship, worship is the sublimest expression. All the exercise of the religious life, meditation and prayer, love and faith, surrender and obedience all culminate in worship. Recognizing what God is in His holiness, His glory, and His love, realizing what I am as a sinful creature and as the Father's redeemed child. In worship, I gather up my whole being and present myself to my God to offer Him the adoration and the glory which is His due. The truest and fullest and nearest approach to God is worship. Every sentiment and every service of the religious life is included in it. To worship is man's highest destiny, because in it God is all. Jesus tells us that with Him coming, Jesus tells us that with His coming, a new worship will commence. All that hidden of Samaritan had called worship, all even that the Jews had known of worship in accordance with the provisional revelation of God's law, will make way for something entirely and distinctly new, the worship in spirit and in truth. This is the worship He was to inaugurate by the giving of the Holy Spirit. This is the worship which now alone is well pleasing to the Father. It is for this worship especially that we have received the Holy Spirit. Let us, at the very commencement of our study of the work of the Spirit, take in the blessed thought that the great object of which the Holy Spirit is within us is that we worship in spirit and in truth. Such does the Father seek to be His worshipper. For this He sent forth His Son and His Spirit. In spirit, in spirit, in spirit. When God created man, a living soul, that soul as the seal and organ of His personality and consciousness was linked on the one side through the body with the outer visible wall, on the other side through the spirit with the unseen and the divine. The soul had to decide whether it would yield itself to the spirit, by it to do link with God and His will, or to the body and the solicitation of the visible. In the fall, the soul refused to rule of the spirit. In the fall, the soul refused the rule of the spirit and became the slave of the body with its appetite. Man became flesh. The spirit lost its destiny place to rule and become little more than a dormant power. It was now no longer the ruling principle but is thrown captive. And the spirit now stands in opposition to the flesh, the name for the life of soul and body together is their subjection to sin. And the spirit now stands in opposition to the flesh, the name for the life, the name for the life of soul and body together in their subjection to sin. When speaking of the unregenerated man in contrast with the spiritual, in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14, Paul called him physical, soulish or animal, having only the natural life. The life of the soul comprehends all our moral and intellectual faculty, as they may even be directed toward the thing of God, apart from the renewal of the divine spirit. Because the soul is under the power of the flesh, man is spoken of as having become flesh, as being flesh, as the body consists of flesh and bone, and the flesh is that part of it which is specially enjoined with sensitiveness and through which we receive our sensation from the outer world. The flesh denotes human nature, as it has become subject to the world of sins. And because the whole soul has thus become under the power of the flesh, the scriptures speak of all the attributes of the soul as belonging to the flesh and being under its power, so it contrasts in reference to religion and worship. The two principles from which they may proceed. There is a fleshly wisdom and a spiritual wisdom in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 12, Colossians chapter 1, verse 9. There is a service of God trusting in the flesh and glorifying in the flesh, and a service of God by the Spirit in Philippians chapter 3, verse 3, and 4, Galatians chapter 6, verse 13. There is a fleshly mind and a spiritual mind in Colossians chapter 2, verse 18, Colossians chapter 1, verse 9. There is a will of the flesh and a will which is of God working by his Spirit in John chapter 1, verse 13, Philippians chapter 2, verse 13. There is a worship which is a satisfying of the flesh, because it is in the power of what flesh can do. In Colossians chapter 2, verse 18 to 23. And a worship of God which is in the Spirit. It is this worship Jesus came to make possible and to realize in us by giving a new spirit in our innermost part, and then within that God's Holy Spirit. There is a worship which is a satisfying of the flesh, because it is in the power of what flesh can do in Colossians chapter 2, verse 18 to 23, and a worship of God which is in the Spirit. It is this worship Jesus came to make possible and to realize in us by giving a new spirit in our innermost part.